Red Web. I'm your host, Brad West, where we talk about comic books, culture, and superheroes mostly. Today, we've got my co-host Greg and Bo. They're my husband and my superhero best friend, so we're going to have a lot of fun today talking about the Crisis on Infinite Earths. I'm sure you've all heard about this by now if you're in any way, shape, or form in tune to the superhero world. CW Arrowverse, as it's known, DC Comics collection of shows on the CW, is building up to a huge crossover between the different shows, and we thought we would go back into time, into 1985, and talk about the comic book event that inspired it. The comic book event, Crisis on Infinite Earths, same name, is actually one of the most important, if not the most important, major event in modern comic book history, even though it was back in 1985. It has influenced everything in comic book world pretty much since then, superhero world since then. So much has been taken from this, and I mean the very concept of the multiverse, as we know in pretty much every major science fiction fantasy world now, has come to adapt. Starts with Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now I am a little bit disappointed that my comic book aficionados are not as familiar with it as I am. I got Bo to actually read that recently. So
I've been reading it today.
He's been reading it today. Yeah, you kind of like failed on your homework last week. But we're going to talk about it. The cool thing about the Crisis on Infinite Earths is that it has affected so many things since then that even if you aren't aware of it, you're probably familiar with some of it. So
yeah, there's so much that happened because of it that even not having read it, you can't help but be aware of it.
Yeah. And I mean also to all of the companies now have these big, huge, giant comic events that happen almost every year, and there's crossovers and every single thing, and then it really all started with Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Sometimes they go a little overboard.
Yeah, way overboard, and it's brought some really good things, but I think that it's brought some really bad things, because I agree that it's gotten to a point where it's impossible to collect every single crossover, and then you don't know if the crossover is actually going to have a pivotal thing happening, because sometimes the crossovers is somebody just walks through a panel. And it's like that's I bought this book because I thought it was part of the story, and it's just
and you have your main story arc, and then you have all of your side books.
Yeah, and the side books, sometimes you need the side books to understand exactly what's going on in the main.
Sometimes you don't, and you don't know which until you've bought them, and you're going, why did I waste my money on this?
For better or for worse, Crisis on Infinite Earths was the innovator of the major event comic book crossover / tie-ins. And you can pick up a copy of this at one of our affiliates, Dragon's Lairs Comics and Fantasy. They will have some collected editions, really easy to find anywhere, and they're super fun. And the cool thing about this being go back in time, when this was a new idea, they didn't quite have the money grabby scope of them that they have these days.
Yes.
So you can actually get the whole thing out of here. Now, basically...
And it was done by a master. I mean, Marv Wolfman and George Perez.
And George Perez. I mean they're a masterful
there's
writer,
so many
a
characters,
beautiful artist.
Yeah, there's so many characters in Marvel and DC that they've created that it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, Black Cat and Spider-Man. Black Cat was created by Marv Wolfman. Blade was created by Marv Wolfman.
We were talking earlier. Technically, Spider-Woman, as far as we're concerned.
Spider-Woman. He actually wrote the entire run, the first run of the Spider-Woman comic. And Black Cat was supposed to be a villain for Spider-Woman, and they moved him over to Spider-Man instead of Spider-Woman. And so he brought Black Cat over and launched her in Spider-Man instead. So, and history was made.
Yeah. Marv Wolfman was a prolific Marvel creator until he moved over to DC.
And then he created prolifically over there.
Right.
He's a prolific creator.
Yeah.
But his start his start at DC was the New Teen Titans. New Teen Titans was his collaboration with artist George Perez in an attempt to compete with the then popular X-Men of Marvel Comics. And the Titans TV show that we watch today is mostly based on the new Teen Titans, not the original Teen Titans. So these are the creators who really shaped characters that everybody knows today. Marv Wolfman, George Perez, an amazing artist. I love George Perez. He worked on my favorite comic book character, Firestorm, like was his first thing in Marvel Comics.
DC.
Or DC Comics, excuse me, from Marvel Comics when he moved over to DC. He did so well at DC that they gave him an extended contract. He had been working on the New Teen Titans with Marv Wolfman. Marv Wolfman was also an editor at DC Comics, and what inspired pretty much led to this was at the time he was editor of the Green Lantern titles, he receives a letter from a fan concerned that the characters don't recognize each other even though they had previously met just issues back.
Like 2 or 3 issues prior.
And what it really was that they were actually talking about one of the parallel Earths DC had accomplished. Now, the concept of the multiverse goes back to Flash 123, 1962, I think it was, Flash number 123, where the Silver Age Flash meets the Golden Age Flash as the Flash of two worlds. This is a very important moment in comic book history, and it was the first time that the concept of tying in the modern, at the time, comic books with the old comic books had come into play. And this became so popular in itself that it kind of opened what Marv Wolfman considered to be a Pandora's box. It goes into...
It was your first... It was the creation of basically the multiverse.
Multiverse.
Because Flash and Flash, you had Jay Garrick and Barry Allen, were not of the same world. So how did they meet? Well, they're
this was their attempt. This was their attempt to explain why there were two completely wildly different versions of the Flash. Well, they were on different planets, Earths, parallel worlds. That was all good and well until they decided to bring that over into the Justice League comic book, and their first Crisis on Earth 1 was the other Earth had needed help from the other Earth, and this began an annual crossover between the two different worlds in the Justice League comic books, and also is what establishes the buzzword that DC will continue to use even up until like last year, Crisis. So every time you see Crisis, it's DC cashing in on this very first.
To this.
Sorry, it goes all the way back to this. So Marv Wolfman deciding that one of the reasons that DC was losing all of its sales to Marvel was more relatable because Marvel was more unified. It was a single universe, and even though DC had good intentions by giving different creators this like, oh, multiverse will open up your creative freedom, it ended up being just confusing, a convoluted mess. Too many people, like I was saying earlier, the original continuity whores, as we call them today, they were like real sticklers for like, well, this happened in this one, why didn't this happen in this one? And it continued to alienate writers or creators and as well as fans at the same time. So Marv Wolfman's like, okay, let's go back to basics. Let's get rid of this multiverse and let's do something fun with it. Let's make it this like big bombastic thing. So he comes up with the idea for the Crisis on Infinite Earths.
So he actually came up with the idea of the history of the DC universe. But because of the way he pitched it, there was so many of the editors going, that sounds worse than just a history lesson. Because he was talking about combining everything into one thing. And that's when it got changed to Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Right.
But yeah, originally it was just supposed to be the history of DC.
And that was a play off of the Crisis on Earth 1 and Earth 2. And so we kind of got out of hand at that point. It was actually super fun. I read it when I was like very young. I remember most of it as story-wise goes. That's why I was having Bo read it, so he could remember the story, and I can go back and check in on some of the fun little history tidbits that we love to talk about in the background. And some of the cool things about it were the high death toll, which again. Bo, you're saying you don't.
Death toll.
Yeah, high death toll. Marvel was known for having higher stakes at the time, and the idea of death in their comics, not like today, like we've said, you know, the revolving door of death.
Back in the day,
back then,
when
it
a
meant a little
character
bit
died,
more.
they stayed dead.
So they stayed dead.
I mean, the big rule was the two people that will always be dead in the Marvel Universe is Bucky and Uncle Ben. You see where that's going.
And Bucky eventually came back anyway. Same thing with Jason Todd. He was supposed to be dead forever, and they brought him back. So that's a whole other thing, which is actually kind of fun, too, because when I talk about the redheaded Robin, that's Crisis on Infinite Earths. Jason Todd was originally redheaded before the Crisis, Batman made him dye his hair
so that they wouldn't know that he had a new Robin.
After the Crisis, he had black hair to start with. That's just a little trivia thing, but it got kind of really cool. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the actual story, do you know like the basic story behind it? It's very similar to the shows. Are you keeping up with the CW shows at all?
I'm not.
Oh, fail. Epic fail. Sorry. We're going to shame Greg a little bit. They're actually really cool.
I've been busy at work.
You're busy at work. Yeah. That's a good excuse. Who needs sleep? Watch TV shows. Basically, it goes to the beginning of time and these two beings, the Monitor, the Anti-Monitor. The Monitor is a celestial being whose basic reason for being is to catalog all the different universes. He catalogs the different worlds. So
the way I understood it, reading it today, is he is actually responsible for having a hand in creating the universe. It was supposed to be a singular universe, but something happened spinning out of control, and that's where the multiverse came from. Which, of course, leads back to the big idea on this, is that they're trying to save everything. Because, like I said, you've got Earth 1, you've got Earth 2, you've got Carlton's Earth, which I forget, I think they called it Earth S, something like that.
Well, that's actually a good point that you brought up. The other Earths, at this time, DC had such a long history of publication. They had pretty much, from the golden age back in the day, they had put a lot of companies out of business. And over the years, they had acquired other smaller companies. And not all of them didn't even know what to do with. They had the rights to so many characters they didn't know what to do with. But they also started publishing stories of characters that were popular enough. One big example is, and the movie just came out last year, was Shazam.
Captain Marvel.
Right, Captain Marvel.
Because in Infinite Crisis, he is still Captain Marvel.
He is still Captain Marvel.
Because you have the Marvel family, which is not the same Marvel family you see in Shazam.
Right.
Because it was Captain Marvel, Mary Marvel Jr., and then...
Correct.
Uncle Dobby.
So the whole point of Captain Marvel being called Shazam was that
and the tiger, yes.
was that DC had the rights to the Captain Marvel characters, but Marvel, by the time DC bought Captain Marvel characters, had copyrighted the name Captain Marvel. Now the problem was, no, they didn't copyright it; they trademarked it, which was a slight difference. They had a comic book called Captain Marvel and their own character Captain Marvel, but they neglected to prevent DC from using the character name Captain Marvel. Only thing was, DC couldn't use the title Captain Marvel. Well, DC...
This is what started the confusion on Captain Marvel, because they called the book The Power of Shazam.
Actually, they called the TV show Shazam. This is one of the main things that Greg really likes to talk about, is the TV show Shazam. Now, this predates the Crisis on Infinite Earths, because Wonder Woman was popular, the Hulk was popular, the TV shows were getting into the superhero TV shows. DC Comics wanted to create another TV show, but they didn't want to use Superman because they had other plans for Superman. And so they're like, okay, well, let's use a character that we don't use in the comic books, because at the time, Shazam, Captain Marvel, whatever you call him, was not part of the DC universe. He was one of their other publications that they had from before that they were like, okay, we're not publishing this guy. He's a cool character. He used to be really popular. Let's put him on TV. Turns out the TV show was popular enough that people wanted to read him in the comics. And DC is like, okay, we're going to cash in on this. We're going to print a new comic book. But because they couldn't use the name Captain Marvel, both the TV show and the new comic book were called Shazam. Now, one of the things that were meant to be established by the Crisis on Infinite Earths was to not only cut down the continuity of all of these other DC stories, but to incorporate these other brands that they had purchased. Some of the major ones, in addition to the Fawcett Comics, Captain Marvel, Shazam, etc., were the Carlton Comics, which consisted of Captain Atom, Blue Beetle, The Question, all the characters who, by the way, inspired the Watchmen. We talked about this before. So they incorporated those characters in the DC Universe proper, as well as the Quality Comics. Quality Comics, which was home of Police Comics, so they were able to get characters like Plastic Man, the Freedom Fighters, who you've actually seen, Uncle Sam, but the Ray, but Condor, if you've seen the CW animated series, The Ray, or one of the previous Arrowverse crossovers. I did not realize
that they actually used Earth X in
Yes, yes.
in that.
The Crisis on Earth X from the Arrowverse was based on that.
So for those of you that have seen the Arrowverse, they do go to Earth X, which is Nazi Earth.
Yes. Fun fact, though, Freedom Fighters was not a thing at the time Quality Comics was published. The individual characters were all part of the Quality Comics catalog. It wasn't until DC started publishing that they put them together on a team and called them Freedom Fighters. So that's actually a little fun fact, though. So, another cool thing is George Perez, again, one of my favorite artists, was not one of the original artists intended to write it. George Perez previously had worked on various Marvel projects, and he did the Teen Titans versus X-Men crossover, which
I love that book.
Sold really well. Well, he also started doing a Justice League Avengers book, and Marvel, for whatever reason, you have to go back in time and ask them. I don't know.
Yeah.
Changed their mind. They pulled the plug on it. I guess it sold too. The other one sold too well. They didn't want DC to have it. They didn't want to share their toys. I don't know. Whatever. George Perez had drawn quite a bit of this. In fact, in the early 2000s, later Marvel finally let it go, and they produced a JLA versus Avenger, and he used art from the original drawings. But at the time, he was pretty miffed off about this, and having just signed a contract with DC Comics, he begged Marv Wolfman, who was working on Teen Titans with him, he's like, I really want to draw this. Part of his motivation in later interviews, he would say, was pretty much to get revenge on Marvel for screwing him on that project.
Yeah.
In fact, fun little tidbit, I don't remember which issue, and I have to go back and read them myself. I was hoping you'd come across it. There is a panel in which
maybe I didn't. I just need to go back and look.
In which one of the universes destroyed by the Anti-Monitor and the Cataclysm
appears to be a Marvel-like universe.
Is the Marvel universe, which is it's kind of fun. The cool thing about this is George Perez had so much fun drawing it. He wanted the opportunity to draw characters. He'd never ever get another chance to draw. He drew hundreds and hundreds of characters, and this is what established him in the industry as what was known as Hero Explosion. And you'll see a lot of his art. A lot of artists have imitated him over the years. I
mean, like you said, he drew hundreds upon hundreds of characters, and it just kind of goes to show the level of craftsmanship that he puts into his work, because you still see, even though it's all one artist doing this, you still see those distinct features and everything that make those characters easily identifiable. Whereas I have seen other artists that have not had to use as large of a catalog for projects, and you're going, wait, when did this character change costumes? He looks like he's wearing the costume of so-and-so. Oh.
That's who that's supposed to be.
My bad.
But one of the cool things is we were talking about the Secret Wars. Marvel had done a crossover event at around the same time. Now, there is some debate as to who was first, Marvel or DC, but DC is generally credited with coming up with the idea of the Maxi series, because Secret Wars, though technically published before the Crisis, was actually conceived after. It just
so the fun thing about the Infinity Crisis, what kind of makes this go, they came first, is that they started researching, and they proposed the idea, and they hired a research group to read all of DC comics that have ever been written. Took them 2 years to write.
Too long.
It was supposed to come out originally in 82. They pushed it back to 83. It did not come out till 85, which
and Marvel's Secret Wars was 84.
Came out 84. So, and of course DC at the time also didn't do a lot of publicity, or there wasn't a lot of marketing towards it. So no one knew anything about Infinity Crisis until it came out. And
there were some like lead-ins. But the really fun thing about it is, and comic books do this more today than they used to, but it was fun that they had hints.
Yes.
There were all kinds of little things you didn't know, and that goes back starting with the original appearances of the Monitor.
Back in 82.
Back in 82. So one of the cool things that was really unique about this was that Wolfman creates a character named the Monitor, who, as we said, was at cataloging the universe. But he first starts up appearing in the background of various comic books. It was actually an editorial.
He shows up in the shadows.
It was an editorial decision that he should appear in every single comic book, which not all of the writers or editors are actually particularly fond of. But he was meant to be used as this vaguely, maybe he's a villain, maybe he's a not, we don't know what he is kind of character. And he was supposed to show up.
For the first 2 years that they did that, they weren't even allowed to show his face.
Yeah.
He was a shadowy figure in the background that was providing weapons to villains, that was doing stuff to help heroes, and you're just sitting here going,
what's his deal?
What's going on?
Which is kind of cool, which actually makes it more interesting to me. I didn't really realize the depth of this character, again, because this was much too young for me to read all the tie-ins, but knowing this and thinking, okay, they're doing a pretty cool job with the Monitor on the CW shows, because that's kind of what he's doing. They're giving him all this stuff where, I mean, even Green Arrow's like, okay, what is he good? Is he bad? We don't know what's going on. It's kind of fun with that. So I really dig that part about him. So
yeah. But no, it was funny looking into it and everything, because you find out that they don't give the name of the editor in the article that they talk about it, but the year before, in '84, Wolfman reminds all the editors and writers to use the Monitor
at least twice.
At least twice in every book.
Somewhere.
And one of the editors made a fuss about it, and then when it was decided that no, Wolfman gets to make this call, that editor just shut up and would not speak for the rest of the meeting.
Yeah, I would love to know who it was.
They don't name who it was. I know, I would love to also. But yeah, they don't name who it was. But yeah, he apparently pissed off.
My money's on Len Wein, but whatever.
He apparently pissed off at least one of the editors fairly badly with this story.
Right. So, some of the fun things were the, I don't know, the time it took to research it. I don't know. Cool thing is that happy accidents happen like this. So even though it was meant to come out earlier, it got pushed back to the point where it just happened to coincide with DC's 50th anniversary. So they're like, we'll capitalize on that.
We'll
Why
make
not?
it a 50th year anniversary event.
So by the time they did start marketing it, it actually was part of the marketing, which was really kind of cool. And a cool thing about the tie-ins, and this is something to really note that separates it from a lot of the crossovers to follow, especially those with Marvel, DC had it tie in with every single publication at the time. Every one of their titles. Eventually, this would become a common practice to have an annual crossover. Both Marvel and DC saw that there was money to be made in this, and it got out of hand by Modern Era.
But unlike what happens in Modern Era, where you've got a big crossover event going on, but you've got books that take place after it coming out at the same time, making references that end up not happening in the main story.
It's a lot more linear.
This took place over the entirety of the DCU. It is a 12-issue story, and it is touched on everything. And they still reference back to it to this day.
And another cool thing is that they used every single title, not just titles that were failing in sales. Marvel would go on to create, we've just seen the Infinity War, Infinity Crisis. The Infinity Crisis series started in Marvel as an actual gimmick to boost sales of lower selling comic books. So the original Infinity War, Infinity Gauntlet story took place in a crossover maxi series, but it really only crossed over in comic books that Marvel felt at the time needed a little help getting people to read them. So it was kind of a shifty kind of thing back then. Whereas DC, it's like, we're going to do it all. We're going to do everybody. So that's kind of a cool little thing to note back when you're talking about that as well. Let's see, what are some very fun things other than Monitor actually first appeared in the New Teen Titans. That was the very first appearance of him providing weapons to villains that, turns out he's testing the heroes and such as that. So, but I'm pretty sure that's how George Perez ends up finding out about it.
Probably.
And it had a lot of great effects on the comic book world. It had a lot of legacies that come out of it, including rebooting the entire DC Comics universe, or the majority of them.
Well, and that's where you get your legacy characters. One of your first ones, of course, one of the first legacy characters you encounter in the story itself is a Green Lantern, Jon Stewart.
Jon Stewart.
Because when he meets Alan Scott for the first time, Alan actually makes questions, who are you?
Because previously...
Because you're not the Green Lantern I know. And he's going, well, yes, that Green Lantern. And they don't name him, but of course they're talking about Hal.
Jordan.
You know, had a splitting of ways with the Guardians. You know,
which is also very
hat.
indicative of DC's progressive attempts at the time in their reboots and stuff. You know, having a central black character was really important at the time, and using him in the crossover instead of chickening out and going back to the original one was actually pretty cool of them to do.
But then you get your other legacy characters, because with the passing of Barry...
Speaking of high body counts, the death of the original Barry Allen Flash, and of course the original Supergirl, Kara Zor-El, they're two of the most iconic moments in all of comic book history. Yeah. I mean, they've been repeated many times.
The poster for Crisis with Superman holding Supergirl. You have seen it.
It's been copied.
You may not remember it, but you've seen it.
But the cool thing about that is that by the end of it, Kid Flash, Wally West, took over as the Flash. This was the first time that you ever had an instance of a sidekick making good, as they say. It's the first time you got them actually growing up and taking over their mentor's place. This was a really big thing in comic books at the time, because everybody else was like, you know, sidekicks are perpetually sidekicks.
Yeah, I mean,
is what
Robin, yes, he eventually became Nightwing, but Robin was Robin for years. I mean, you didn't get Robin... Dick Grayson didn't step up to become Batman until...
First late 90s and then the early 2000s.
Yeah, and, you know, with someone who should be dead like 80 times over. But, you know...
I'm going to talk about that. I have a girlfriend who get mad at me if I talk about that. So.
But yeah, so you had your first instance of one of the sidekicks actually getting to step up and take their mentor's role. And the impact that had, not just on the character, but the characters around him, where he eventually becomes a member of the Justice League, but at the same time, they still... It took them a while to stop treating him like, even him, like a sidekick, because he wasn't Barry.
Yeah, so I started reading comics after this came out, so I had to go back when I was younger and reread this. But the one of the first comic books that I picked up was the Wally West Flash, because I'm like, I'm Brad West, Wally West. There's a connection. So I actually, Wally West was my Flash. So
and yet
I read.
He's never cosplayed him.
You know, that's actually kind of interesting. I need to work on that with the red hair and everything. But the cool thing is all of the elements that the modern audiences
attribute to
Barry
Flash.
Allen, the Flash, actually were Wally West.
Yeah.
The whole concept of the Speed Force didn't even exist during this. He just disappeared into time.
Wally West revealed that he disappeared into the Speed Force until much later.
Yeah, Wally West was the one who discovered the Speed Force. Wally West came with like half a dozen of the different characters and concepts.
Well, being able to vibrate through stuff, that was...
No, Flash did that before.
Did he?
Oh yeah, Flash did that before. He did that in the cartoon long before. That was a Flash thing.
I missed that one.
No.
But Star Labs?
Star Labs, that was not a thing in the Flash comic books until Wally West. The TV show stole that from him. Like a ton of things that you see in the Flash TV show were not actually Barry Allen, because Barry Allen was dead when these concepts came up. It was all Wally West. So those are some kind of interesting things to think about that, again, this had some like major influences on the way that superhero stories in general, the DC universe in general, which has just kind of picked up on.
So there's one thing I want to talk about, and that's Pariah. Because he is going to be playing a role in the upcoming series. They have not actually introduced Pariah. Maybe. We have speculation. We have speculation. But they have not actually introduced the character of Pariah into the Arrowverse yet. He is coming because, you know...
You've seen pictures of him online. Tom Cavanaugh will be playing the character Pariah in addition to his many Harrison Wells characters and Reverse Flash. So he's actually, I think, pulling triple duty or something on the show.
I actually just watched Batwoman, the last episode of Batwoman.
We're behind on that one.
he gets created in the end credits.
Oh, okay,
Okay.
cool. So
Of
yeah, we'll
Batwoman.
watch that one tonight.
So it's Batwoman. Batwoman
Is the one to watch for that.
last
So see, you
Batwoman.
are a little bit ahead on some of them.
Right?
But yeah,
But yeah, so the interesting thing in the comic book about this character is that he
kind of,
sort of starts the chain reaction.
He starts
And
hoping.
from his perspective, for centuries he blames himself for the destruction of his world because his world is the first one to go. And so Pariah is then cursed to survive. And he keeps getting drawn to all the other worlds right at the moments of their death. And so he spends the first half of the story arc popping up, trying to warn the heroes of whatever world he lands on.
But nobody listens.
But nobody listens.
Yeah.
You know what? That's a big problem they have.
Right?
I'm sorry.
Are
like
you,
with all
are you
the
saying he
crap
has a
you've
Cassandra
seen.
complex?
Of all the stuff that you've seen, and this is hard to believe.
Sidetrack just a little bit, talking about Raven, because we mentioned her earlier. When they formed the new Teen Titans, I think it was,
Yes.
Raven goes to the Justice League for help first.
Yeah.
And they turn to Zatanna and go, "What do you think?" And Zatanna goes all magic-y going, "I sense a great darkness." No, go away.
Go away. Yeah. It's like, why did you even ask?
Yeah, you sense a great darkness. She's asking for your help with something that's big coming.
Right.
You sense a great darkness. Maybe it's what she's referring to.
Right.
But no, send her away. Nope, we're good. We can handle it. We'll handle other things. You know, you go find someone else to take care of your problems. That was the thing that always bugged me about
I don't want to spoil it, but if you saw the last episode of Green Lantern, the Green Arrow, the last episode of Green Arrow is my favorite. Is when he's talking to Lance, to Mayor Lance at the time, because they brought Paul Blackthorne back for that episode, and he tells them that he's reliving the same day over and over again, you know, Groundhog style day, and he's like,
Yes,
okay,
I
he's
love
like,
that.
I believe you. And he's like, what, you believe me? I
What?
thought I would have
Well,
to convince you
I
more.
thought-
He's like, I've seen one of my daughters come back from the dead twice, another daughter come from another dimension, an alternate version of her. He's like, and a guy who runs so fast that you can't even see him. He's
Yeah,
like,
at
this
this
isn't
point,
even facing me.
you kind of got to take something at face value.
And you know, you would think that would be more of what the Justice League would do in this
I know.
situation.
But yeah, and
And
that,
like all the stuff you've seen, and you have a problem with that.
we
whatever.
actually had to rewind because the two
It
of us
was
were
so
laughing
funny.
so hard.
I loved it. I loved it.
Because yeah, with everything y'all see, really, that's a stretch of the imagination. Okay.
Right. So, ultimately, what ended up falling down is by the time all this said and done, and read this, we won't spoil all of it for you, but the fun part is when it's all said and done, you've got a merger of what's in essence boiled down to 5 continuities left. You've got the Golden Age and the Modern Age for the first time are in the single universe. And this is where they create the idea that they are legacy characters. So instead of having a new Flash and a new version of Superman and a new Green Lantern as independent of the original World War II characters, they're actually inspired by them. And some of the older ones even managed to survive for whatever reason. Their powers kept them old, etc.
Except for Green Lantern. I mean, they kind of really still go with, you know, they're two separate things. Because they're...
Yeah, it's not really in the 90s until the 90s when they explain why they're connected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the Golden Age Green Lantern, Alan Scott, his powers are magic-based. Whereas your modern Green Lantern, John Stewart, Hal Jordan, all them, their power rings work on super science. You know, science so advanced it might as well be magic.
Right.
But you know, it's not magic. And so, you know, for years, they shared a name because Alan Scott, for some reason, found the thing that gave him his power. He carved it into a lantern and
Right.
made his ring.
And the Green Lanterns, it's not really a lantern, it's just a power battery that happens to look like an Earth lantern. It's a thing. But then you also get the Charlton characters get merged into it, Quality gets merged into it, the Fawcett family gets merged into it. So you have Shazam, Captain Marvel in the DC universe proper. So that's actually one of the main things. And you also get some reboots, Superman, Wonder Woman, etc. And then there's a lot of
You know,
loose...
there is something else I also learned that I found interesting So the Alexander Luthor that ends up taking up the Monitor's cause is from Earth 3, which was the crime syndicate Earth with Ultraman, Power Ring, blah, 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 blah. And, of course, his dad was a Luthor because instead of being evil, he was good while all your heroes were evil. I didn't realize his mom was Lois.
I did not either.
Yeah.
I knew that
that version of Lex Luthor married that version of Lois Lane, and so it was Lois Luthor, of course, but yeah.
That's interesting. Now, they've tried over the years to try and compensate and course correct. At one point, there was hyper time, alternate timelines, as opposed to alternate realities, and then of course they had alternate dimensions, which it just
and now you're back to
it got messy
an
and
actual
messy.
multiverse.
Well, they ended up following it up. Now, Jeff Johns, we talk about his influence on DC Comics to varying degrees. He's like a blessing and a curse at various points in the continuity.
Two of the stories that I really enjoy that Jeff Johns did was, of course, Green Lantern Rebirth and Flash Rebirth.
Now, this is the Rebirth before the New 52 Rebirth.
Yes.
Because he really likes that word, too.
Yeah, right.
It might as well be Crisis.
That's where... So Hal Jordan went mad, became evil, died, came back, but didn't come back. So he was... a lot of his fans that grew up with Hal Jordan were upset that they killed off such a iconic character. And I can understand why, because I'd be fairly upset if they killed off Nightcrawler, which they did.
A lot.
No, they only killed him off once. I mean, another story later time. But, so, to try and appease some of those fans that were being extremely vocal, they brought Hal Jordan back. They made him the left hand of God, the Spectre, the spirit of vengeance in the DC universe, godlike powers.
Which is interesting because Spectre plays a major part in the Crisis on Infinite
not the Hal
Earths.
Jordan version.
Not the Hal Jordan version, the original.
But the original, version of the Spectre does play a big part in this. But a lot of fans still were not happy because Hal should be a Green Lantern. He should never have gone evil. So eventually, retcon, they did the Green Lantern Rebirth, where when the Spectre sacrificed himself in a big battle, Hal's spirit had the chance to move on to heaven, and Ganthet, one of the Guardians of the Galaxy, if you don't know, being the meddler that he is, used his power to draw Hal back to life in his original body, which was interred on Oa.
Well, this isn't a Green Lantern story, so let's get to the point.
But, anyways, so Jeff Johns brought back a couple of the iconic characters that older fans grew up reading. Hal Jordan,
what got him
Barry
really...
Allen. That's where he got the big name.
Yeah, he really got his start doing the Rebirth stuff. And the cool thing about him at the time was everybody really liked him because he had an affinity for the Silver Age, the pre-Crisis Age. He had a love for it because he grew up with it, and so he was trying to find a way to bring back the pre-Crisis characters in a post-Crisis modern era, and more or less he did a good job for a while until he got a big head and started just going hog wild.
Be nice.
And well, no, that leads me into like my next thing. So Crisis on Infinite Earths was eventually followed up 20 years later by a sequel called, brace yourself, The Infinite Crisis, which is wholly different from the Crisis on Infinite Earths. Spearheaded, of course, by Jeff Johns, and this was an attempt to bring back the multiverse. He brought back the multiverse in the capacity of a limited only 52. Instead of infinite Earths, there was a limited multiverse of 52 universes. Why 52? We don't know. We do know that DC had been playing with the whole 52 concept because 52 weeks in a year, and they had 52 week
several years prior, they had the DC 52, which was... No,
it was the same year.
Was it the same year?
Yeah, it's what came out of it.
Okay.
It was part of it.
There was an issue that came out every week of the year.
Once a week, a weekly comic book. That was kind of fun. 52, once a week, whatever.
But your trinity of heroes, Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, were all backburnered. They were...
And this brought a lot of the other characters into the spotlight.
Stepping back. So Clark Kent showed up in several of those, but Superman never did.
Right.
Same with Bruce Wayne and Batman and Diana and Wonder Woman.
Now, the idea was that he was trying to kind of still tie into the Crisis on Infinite Earths, but bring a lot of these older characters that had either fallen by the wayside since this or had been completely gotten rid of at the time too, and get them into the front and make them kind of interesting. And again, that was with varying levels of degrees of success. It was followed up shortly thereafter, within the next few years, by a third part called The Final Crisis, which we all know is not really the Final Crisis, because then DC just turns around and reboots their entire universe into the New 52. When the New 52 wasn't 52 weeks, it was 52 comic books. They were making this edict to simplify and only print 52 issues at a time.
52 titles.
It was a thing too. Well, that of course leads into a whole nother multi-comic book year crossover called Convergence. So that was kind of fun because even in the Convergence, you'd have to go and look it up. I'm not even going to start. That's a whole nother episode by itself. But they did revisit the Crisis on Infinite Earths. Many of the characters even went back in time to the time of the Crisis. Writers were very excited to get a chance to play in that sandbox, only to just turn right back around and create DC Rebirth. And they're currently working on a dark multiverse, which also has its own version of Crisis on Infinite Earths. I have it actually written down here like this. It was followed up by the Crisis, Infinite Crisis, meh, Final Crisis, garbage, New 52 Crisis, Convergence, it was a little bit of fun, and Rebirth, Dark Multiverse Crisis, what the hell. So that's how that one goes down for me. Now, another huge fun thing that came out of this that has been very popular, especially with the movie, which was not so awesome but did well commercially, was the Suicide Squad. Now, Suicide Squad comes out of the, well, I was saying there was a lot of extra fat left over. They get all of these different comic book companies, they merge them all together, they have all of these heroes. Well, we know what we did with all the heroes. Some of them died, some of them didn't, some of them got merged into new versions, some of them got rebooted completely. But then, they also had a crap load of new villains. They were just sitting there, doing nothing. Well, having learned that, again, bloodthirsty fans love people dying, and that makes the stakes real. Jerry Ordway, who was at the time doing Firestorm, who's brought on to do some of the inking duties on this, was given the opportunity to play with those villains and created the Suicide Squad. The whole fun of the Suicide Squad, and the reason that people liked it, and the reason people bought it, was because it was a group made up of villains being forced to work for the government. And at any point, very, very Game of Thrones, at any point, one of your favorite characters could die and you didn't know. They were all expendable. And that was actually kind of the fun of it, was like, even if you loved the character, they probably were going to die. And that really led into a very long history of that. And that got rebooted several times, but every time with the same concept, and every time it was every bit as fun. So that was actually kind of one of my favorite things about the coming out of the Crisis on Infinite Earths was Suicide Squad. It was a really, really good book, really well written. It ended up being so popular that all the major creators were like clamoring to get a chance to be a part of it. I know you had some of the Suicide Squad stuff that you read and liked. I mean, it was cool because it was able to pull villains from every aspect, every comic, every fandom managed to get some kind of play in there. So I thought that was super kind of cool too. Thoughts?
On Suicide Squad? Not really.
Or,
I mean, no.
I was never really big into Suicide Squad.
Yeah,
really?
neither was I. But it was a fun concept. I mean, not knowing a whole lot, I think the only character I know for 100% that Suicide Squad has never actually had a chance to use was Joker.
Joker? I don't know if Joker was ever on Suicide Squad or not. I honestly don't know.
I think he was periphery in a couple.
Many Batman characters were.
Let's face it. I mean, the whole thing with Suicide Squad is they're putting bombs in your head. Do what you're told or not. You really think that's going to matter to Joker?
Yeah, now the only fun thing that I really liked out of the second part of this in 2005 when they came up with the Infinite Crisis was Alexander Luthor, basically Jr., the son of Lois and Alexi from Earth 3.
It was Alexi Luthor and Lois Luthor.
Yeah, and Lois Luthor. Actually, after the end of this, there were only 4 characters left who actually remembered anything that was going on. It was the Golden Age Superman and Lois Lane, the Earth 1, or Earth Prime Superboy. Earth Prime Superboy is a really interesting character. He was written as he was one of the very first metafictional characters that DC Comics ever created. Earth Prime Superboy is Superboy from our Earth, the Earth of DC Comics publisher, in a world where Superman is a periodical comic book. This character finds out that he's actually Superman from another dimension, and he's been on the real Earth for a while. And it's kind of fun because then you have like some of the DC comic editors popping in and out of it, and other creators will be in there. But he ends up so powerful that he's like more powerful than any other Superman ever, having been in the real world or whatnot. But the 4 of them are the only ones left by the time everything is over, so they create their own pocket paradise universe where they're going to go off and live and die. Well, Superman doesn't realize that he's getting old, or he's not getting old. He's not getting old as fast as Lois Lane is. Well, Lois Lane is getting old faster than he is, and she's dying.
Well, she ages at the normal rate of a human.
Alexander Luthor Jr. Goes a little crazy because he just spends all this time talking to himself. And that Superman determines that the Earth that was left over is wasting its potential. And decides he wants to bring back his version of the Earth, and he's convinced that doing so will save Lois's life. So they come back and they try to recreate the multiverse. And part of the storyline includes Alexander Luthor Jr. creating a new secret society of supervillains. But my favorite thing is by the end of it, Lex Luthor of the main Earth is the one who defeats him by luring him into an alley where the Joker melts his face off with acid. And his retort is like, that's what you get for not inviting him to your supervillain club. Because the Joker's pretty much, his only purpose there is he's just cheesed off that they didn't invite him to be part of the supervillains. But none of the other supervillains wanted to work with him. That's one of my favorite things. I'm sorry. I don't know why that's just a fun little anecdote part of that, but it just amuses the heck out of me.
Yeah, Joker's kind of one of those characters. You don't invite him to the party because you expect him to show up. You invite him to the party because if you don't, he will.
He will, yeah, right, and then you're going to regret it. One of my favorite things about this time in comic book history is, and I've talked about Firestorm as why he's an important character, he was created pre-Crisis on Infinite Earths because he was one of DC's first attempts to try and capture the formula of Marvel Comics. Ronnie Raymond was a high school student, and he got bonded with a scientific professor, but he had to deal with all of the daily problems, the money problems, the girl problems, balancing college. He ended up going to college. The teenage drama and the relationship drama, and that was their first real attempt at doing that. So that when this actually happened, the crisis happened, afterwards, he was one of the few characters not to get touched. His continuity stayed completely the same.
Completely intact.
Intact because he was already on the way to what they were trying to accomplish. That's one of the reasons that Firestorm, and it's one of the reasons that the Firestorm characters got used so widely in the Suicide Squad is because Jerry Ordway was, of course, doing both of the books at the time. So I find that interesting. But there's a lot of fun stuff that comes out of this. One of the main characters, and we actually, from the very beginning, from the first time we saw the Green Arrow TV show, there was 2 characters that stood out. First of all was Felicity Smoke. Now, for those of you who don't know, Felicity Smoke was a throw-off character, name only, that they used on Green Arrow. I don't think she was even intended to be on there as long as she was, but she was so popular with the fans. The actual Felicity Smoke from the comic book was Firestorm's stepmom. So she actually had nothing to do with Green Lantern or Green Arrow in the comic. I don't know why I say Green Lantern, but Green Arrow in the comic book whatsoever. The only thing is that she was a tech expert. She was super smart, and she was one of the first female technologically experts, but also successful businesswomen in comic books. So she was actually pretty cool at the time. In fact, she found out Firestorm's secret identity before his father did, so she actually started covering for him. She was an interesting character. You'd have to read the comic book to really get the find out of her. But so as soon as Green Arrow started, and I'm like, Felicity Smoke, what is she doing here? That thing.
Yeah, he commented quite frequently on how she didn't belong.
She does not belong here.
She was a great character.
Yeah, she evolved into something completely different on the show. But the second
one. Okay, so the other character, assuming we're thinking the same one, was Diggle's wife,
Lila
Michaels. Who, Lila Michaels, in the Infinite Crisis, is a character called Harbinger.
Which was funny. It took him a couple of seasons to actually do it, but her code name ended up being Harbinger, which I'm like, okay, at least that's a nice nod. Her code name is Harbinger, whatever.
So, but it goes back to your writers and what the fans kind of expect. So, we've mentioned it before. We're big fans of Doctor Who and how they like to lay their seeds out throughout the course of several seasons, and it may not come up until you regenerate it to 3 different doctors. Well, we've argued this. I feel like part of the reason they introduced her, that they chose her, was that because Crisis. Because
the groundwork.
In Flash, they're talking about Crisis pretty much from day one.
I think it was just a throwaway name, and it was a happy accident. And now that they're actually doing the Crisis on Infinite Earths, they're like, well, we've already got her in there.
Yeah. But, so I think she was there as part of the groundwork for Crisis all along. He disagrees.
I disagree. I think that, yeah. I mean, I'm glad that they are, and they are definitely using her to the capacity that she is helping the Monitor. As far as whether or not her origin's going to sync up, well, that remains to be seen. But I do find it kind of cool that they've given her a Harbinger costume. It's actually one of my favorite costumes.
It actually is really nice.
It's one of the most both the Harbinger.
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, both the Harbinger costume and the Pariah costume are very, very good interpretations of their costumes from the comic book. I'm actually I don't imagine any fan wouldn't be very pleased with the way that these two costumes come out. So they're pretty cool. They're very indicative of their design from the book and such. So that's another fun thing if you get a chance to read it. You'll also notice the cover of this beautiful collected edition. Back in 95? Was it 95 was the 10-year anniversary? Or was it later? No.
It was would have been the 10-year anniversary.
No, it was 2000. It was 2000 when it was like maybe a 15-year anniversary, I think. When they first did this cover. Alex Ross, one of my favorite artists of all time.
Man does beautiful work.
He hand paints everything. You cannot get the scope of this here. Google.
Yeah, no.
Google
you need to see the
don't just Google it.
You want me to walk it up to the camera?
No. You still can't even get it. It's too small. Google. Be sure that you Google a high res, because it has to be high res. Now, I used to work at Warner Brothers Art Gallery, and we had a full size print of the original painting.
Oh, if only we could have afforded that.
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, now it's the poster's cheaper now. You can probably find it cheaper on Amazon or something. But this thing has over 1,000 different characters painted on it, hand painted on it. You can look in the background. I spent hours trying to identify as many as I could. You've got every single DC comic book character, Carlton comic book character, Quality comic book character from the Golden Age, Silver Age, every alternate version of them. I mean, there is just some crazy ass detail in this painting. It is actually one of the coolest things ever to come out of the Crisis on Infinite Earths. If you get a chance to look at it, I highly recommend it. It's super cool. So, I don't know. Your favorite things about DC continuity, not necessarily the comic book, but things that you've learned that have come out of this since then.
Wow.
That's a big question.
Yeah, that's a big question. Honestly, I think one of my favorite things has nothing to do with Crisis. It's DC New Frontier. From Darwin Cook. And I mean, that's going before Crisis, back to the beginning of the Silver Age, the bridge between the Golden Age and the Silver Age, because there was such a gap.
Yeah.
No,
it was a great story.
Yeah, one comic Batman has a gun and he's shooting people because he's like a hard-boiled detective.
Because in the Golden Age,
that's what he was.
This whole
And
Batman wouldn't use a gun.
Yeah, that was Silver Age, and that came about because of the Comic Code Authority, which really, of course, we've talked about it before.
Yeah.
Was really because of McCarthyism and because of the
It's
backlash.
also where Robin came from.
Right.
Because of the backlash against the comic industry, because they were saying that kids couldn't read it and it was corrupting the youth of America.
Violent.
Yeah.
But that's actually
So,
very topically on point, though, because
yeah.
that's kind of what this was trying to accomplish too, was making those connections.
Yeah.
But then
left
again,
that open.
so like Batman, one issue he's shooting a gun, killing people, and the next issue
He
he's
changed
Adam
his
West
costume
Batman.
and yeah.
Right. And
I
so
mean, it was such a drastic change for
Yeah.
his character.
And I'm pretty sure Darwin
And there was
Cook
no explanation.
probably
Yeah.
Darwin Cook was probably inspired by the combination of the continuities, because now all of a sudden you have a world where both of them had in some form existed.
Right.
So now
Yeah.
you got this. You got to.
If you haven't read New Frontier, you need to.
Yeah,
It's
as
absolutely
Frontier is
much
brilliant.
as
excellent.
Crisis on Infinite Earths
You can
cleaned
watch the movie.
up.
Yeah.
The book is much better.
Yeah, the book is much better.
Well, the both of them were done by Darwin Cook. Darwin Cook actually wrote the script for the cartoon as well, and was there for the entire making of the cartoon. But it was awesome. We're wrapping up. Please donate to Blue Santa if you're here in Austin or your local children's shelters and things like that this holiday season. Dragon's Lair actually is accepting donations for Blue Santa until the 5th. And then
Members
after
of the
that,
Heroes of Texas will also be volunteering with them, so you
Yeah.
can follow up on our page, heroesoftexas.org, and see some of that information as well.
yeah, and we're really accepting donations till the 16th, but the 5th is the cutoff for donations to Blue Santa for this year. Everything after that is going towards next year.
Also, be sure you go to casatravis.org and get a hold of them and get some donations or volunteer time with them before their cutoff date next week as well. They're another group that we support. They've been taking stuff. You can find them on their Facebook and Twitter page as well.
Yeah, here in Austin, it's casatravis.org.
Correct.
Yeah.
And such. So make sure
And
you're...
then Williamson County is casawilco, I believe, .org. And then there's, for San Marcos and below to San Antonio, I think it's Casa Central, Texas. I mean, you can look it up.
Yeah, you can find our Casa.
You can find Casa.
We love them. They're really good.
They are fantastic.
Yeah. So make sure if you get a chance to read this before the show comes out. It may confuse you more. It may just make it more entertaining.
Yeah, I think that there's going to be so many differences because of
That's kind of
obviously
the
they're
fun of
doing
it, though,
more
right?
of a television show / movie versions.
Well, and that's
Well,
one of the great things with the
Yeah.
TV show. One of the things I'm enjoying, and I'm trying not to read or watch too many YouTube videos because I want some surprise still, but the number of actors that they are bringing back to reprise roles. I mean, yes, you have... he plays the Atom. Why can I not remember his name?
Brandon Routh.
Brandon Routh is also
but
playing
he's coming back
Superman.
and reprising a Superman role.
But they're also introducing new characters like the Ryan Choi Atom. It's going to be a lot of fun. Make sure you watch it. If you get a chance, I say read it. I think the main goal is, and what everybody's hoping for, is that just like the comic books, where it brought all of the continuities together and cleaned up a lot of the confusion, is that the TV shows will also consolidate into one, and Supergirl will no longer be on a separate Earth.
I think Supergirl's
Black
finally going to
Lightning
be
might
joining
not be on a separate Earth anymore, so that's kind of what we're hoping for too. And
have fun.
Have
Yeah.
fun. Just enjoy it. And either which way, we love superheroes. We know you do too. Thank you for joining us on the Red Web, and we hope to bring you more entertainment and more fun behind the scenes drama of the comic book world later. Thanks again.
Okay, you know we still have some time.
Oh yeah, right. No, you're right.